Welcome to one of the most unsettling mysteries ever whispered out of the Ozark Mountains. Before we dive in, I'd love to know where you're watching from and the exact time this story finds you. Drop it in the comments. It's always fascinating to see when and where these tales travel. In the fall of 1895, the Ozarks were still rough country. A place where wilderness pressed in on every settlement. That's when a small community called Hollow Creek simply vanished. The Eldridge family, 17 people in all, disappeared overnight. Fires were left cold in the hearths, meals sat half-finished on tables, but not a single trace of the clan remained. No bodies, no graves, no clear explanation. To this day, the Lost Hollow clan remains one of the most baffling frontier mysteries in America. What follows is a reconstruction built from old newspapers, family journals, and the words of those who risked digging into the silence that followed Hollow Creek's last night. For decades, these records sat in the Missouri Historical Society, later microfilmed and eventually misplaced during a renovation in 1964. The settlement itself lay hidden in a narrow valley between Mount Judea and Compton, deep in what is now Newton County, Arkansas. The only way in was a rugged mountain trail that turned treacherous once winter set in. That remoteness explains why the missing weren't reported for nearly 3 weeks. By then, the trail had gone cold in every sense of the word. Sheriff Thomas Layton of Harrison filed his report on December 3, 1895. He wrote that the community stood deserted, livestock gone from the pens, though feed still lay untouched, homes filled with clothing and family heirlooms left behind. The ashes in the hearths suggested no fire had burned for weeks. No signs of struggle, no bodies anywhere in the surrounding wilderness. Which begs the question, why would an entire family abandon everything they owned without taking even the bare essentials? And why has every attempt to solve this case since then ended, either in frustration or in tragedy? To answer that, we have to go back before the disappearance, back to the origins of the Eldridge clan. Jeremiah Eldridge, born in 1842 in eastern Tennessee, was the third son of a modest tobacco farmer. His family worked 80 acres in Greene County, and like most boys of his station, Jeremiah attended a small parish school until his father declared his education sufficient at 14. Family letters suggest that even as a boy, he was drawn to the land itself, wandering off for hours to study caves and limestone hollows. That fascination with the wilderness would one day lead him and his kin deep into the isolation of the Ozarks, and perhaps straight into the mystery that swallowed them whole. When the Civil War broke out, Jeremiah, like so many young men from Tennessee, took up arms for the Confederacy. Records place him under the command of General Nathan Bedford Forrest, fighting at key battles, including Shiloh. His file shows he was briefly detained after the war, only to be released under the general amnesty. But what stands out isn't the battles he fought, it's the silence. From June 1863 to February 1864, his official whereabouts vanish. A letter from his commanding officer only hints at special duties of a confidential nature, but gives no details. That gap, later studied by those trying to unravel Hollow Creek's mystery, has never been explained. When Jeremiah finally returned home, there was nothing left. The family farm had been burned, his parents were dead, and his 2 brothers had been killed in battle, one at Gettysburg, the other at Nashville. Stripped of everything, Jeremiah scraped by as a laborer and trapper, until he built a modest living as a fur trader. In 1868, he married Rebecca Hollister, a school teacher whose family had also suffered deep losses in the war. Years later, when investigators uncovered Rebecca's diary among the ruins of Hollow Creek, her words painted a portrait of a man altered by what he had seen. "Jay is not the boy I once knew," she wrote. "There is a watchfulness in him now, a quietness. He tells the same stories other soldiers tell, but at night I hear him speak in his sleep of what they found and the voices from below. By morning, he remembers nothing. By 1870, Jeremiah began buying land far from civilization. The first deed shows a 120-acre tract in Newton County, Arkansas, rough, rocky land with little use for farming. One curious detail stands out. The property included a limestone depression nearly half a mile from where he planned to build his home. Why he chose such an isolated valley is still debated. It wasn't fertile, it wasn't convenient, and the nearest settlement was nearly 20 miles away through unforgiving terrain. Rebecca's diary makes clear she wasn't eager to go. "Jay insists this place has been waiting for us," she wrote. "When I say the children will be too far from school, he answers that some knowledge is better learned away from the world." The Eldridges moved into the valley that September, living in a makeshift shelter as they built their cabin. Rebecca described the place as beautiful but unsettling. "The silence here has a weight I have never felt," she wrote. "Our nearest neighbor is a half-day's ride. Jay spends his days exploring the hollow east of camp. He brings back strange rocks and sketches I cannot understand, though Jeremiah rarely spoke of his time in the hollow." Rebecca noted he seemed calmer there, more at peace than she had ever seen him since the war. By 1875, the little settlement had begun to take shape with 3 cabins and 4 children born to Jeremiah and Rebecca Isaac in 1869, Martha in 1871, Samuel in 1873, and Ezekiel in 1875. Rebecca's sister Catherine and her husband William had joined them in 1872, raising their own cabin a stone's throw from the main house. 2 years later, William's brother Thomas arrived with his wife Eleanor. A letter William wrote home in the summer of 1873 offers a glimpse of those early years. The valley provides adequately, though not abundantly. Game is plentiful, and corn and beans grow modestly. Jeremiah knows these mountains as though born to them, though he had never set foot here before. He keeps detailed maps, spends days in the hollow, claiming to study the rocks. He forbids the children from playing there. None of us mind the place is unwelcome, as if it does not wish for laughter. Over the next 2 decades, Hollow Creek slowly expanded. By 1895, there were 5 cabins set in a semicircle around a clearing. Jeremiah and Rebecca lived in the main house surrounded by their grown children and grandchildren. Isaac had married Sarah Collins from Harrison with 2 little ones of their own, Joseph 4 and Ruth just 2. Martha had wed Richard Thornton, the son of Albert and Constance Thornton, who had moved into the valley in 1888 after meeting Jeremiah on a supply trip to Springfield. Martha and Richard had a daughter, Elizabeth 7. Samuel remained unmarried, though his sister Victoria Thornton had married him in what Rebecca described in her journal as a union of necessity rather than affection. Ezekiel, the youngest at 20, seemed unsettled, plagued by dark moods and strange dreams. Rebecca wrote often of her concern for him. Life in the valley was quiet but steady. The families grew corn beans, squash, and potatoes. They raised chickens and hogs, hunted deer, and dried and salted meat to survive the winters when the mountain trail to Harrison was buried under snow and ice. Sundays were reserved for rest and worship with Jeremiah himself, leading Bible readings and hymns. No minister ever came that far into the wilderness, and the nearest church was far beyond reach. Their isolation was not just circumstance, it was choice. Rebecca's journals, found intact when investigators first searched Hollow Creek, remain the most vivid record of that hidden world. Her last entry, dated October 12, 1895, is chilling in its simplicity. Frost came early this year. Samuel brought down 2 deer enough to see us through the winter bartering. Ezekiel is still troubled by the dreams. Martha says the children heard voices in the hollow again last night. Jeremiah insists it is only wind. I do not believe him. His eyes say otherwise. Rebecca's final words hint at something Jeremiah was keeping from the rest of them. Jay has called for a family council tomorrow after Sunday reading, she wrote. Says there is a matter that can no longer be delayed. That single line has drawn attention from investigators ever since. Not just because of the council, but because she again mentions the voices from the hollow. Echo Hollow, as it was known locally, lay about half a mile east of the cabins. It was a perfect limestone depression, circular in shape, 150 feet across and 65 feet deep, its walls sloping evenly at 40 degrees. A county surveyor in 1872 had documented the place, while updating property records, noting its eerie acoustics. Whispers on one side carried clearly to the other. Locals refused to go near it, claiming it was unlucky ground. Rebecca's journals suggest life carried on, much as usual, through the summer and fall of 1895, tending crops, preparing for winter, carrying out the routines of frontier survival. Yet her tone shifted. By July, she wrote more often of Ezekiel's night terrors. By August, the strange noises from Echo Hollow had become a recurring note, creeping into her entries with growing urgency. The clearest glimpse of what was unraveling comes from a letter written by Martha Eldridge to her friend Emma Cartwright in Springfield, dated September 28, 1895. Discovered decades later among Emma's possessions, it paints a chilling portrait. Father grows more peculiar by the day, Martha confessed. Since his last trip to Harrison, he speaks of little besides vigilance. He carries his rifle even to meals. Mother says it is only the war returning to him, but I see her bolt the cabin door even in daylight. She went on to describe how her daughter Elizabeth woke crying, convinced someone had called her name from the darkness outside. Richard dismissed it as an animal, but the look on Jeremiah's face told her otherwise. Most troubling was Ezekiel. He hardly slept, waking in terror about those who wait beneath. Jeremiah had caught him at dawn near Echo Hollow, sitting in silence and staring toward its center. When asked what he was doing, Ezekiel answered that he was listening to instructions. Martha ended her letter with a longing rarely found in the records of Hollow Creek. For the first time since we came here, I wish for the safety of town walls. Richard says we might visit Springfield after winter, but Father will never allow it. He speaks too often of the corruption of towns and the necessity of our isolation. What happened during Jeremiah's September trip to Harrison remains one of the great unanswered questions. Town records confirm he was there on September 14th to trade furs and buy supplies. Harold McCreary, the storekeeper, later told investigators that Eldridge seemed tense, distracted, and left with more ammunition than usual. Harold McCreary, the storekeeper in Harrison, later told investigators that Jeremiah's September visit was unlike any other. He came around midday, as he always did twice a year, trading pelts for coffee, salt, ammunition, and other necessities. But this time Jeremiah asked for twice his usual allotment of rifle cartridges. When McCreary questioned it, Jeremiah simply replied, "Better to have and not need." He seemed restless, eyes flicking toward the door each time it opened. Near the end of his business, a stranger entered the store, a well-dressed man in city clothes, clearly not local. McCreary recalled that the man's attention sharpened when he heard Jeremiah's name. He approached and asked directly if Jeremiah was from Hollow Creek. When Jeremiah confirmed, the stranger pressed further, asking pointed questions about the limestone depression on his land. Their voices dropped, but McCreary caught fragments. The man mentioned a survey and what had been found. Jeremiah snapped back that nothing was found because nothing was there to find. Then the stranger said something about the department still has an interest. Whatever that meant, it left Jeremiah visibly shaken. He abandoned his usual habit of lingering at the hotel for supper and left town in haste. The man's identity was never established. Some thought he might have been Pinkerton, sniffing into the pasts of ex-Confederates. Others suspected a federal agent or a speculator, curious about the valley. A later researcher suggested he represented a mining interest, citing the region's limestone and ore deposits. Whatever the truth, after Jeremiah returned, life at Hollow Creek shifted. Rebecca's journal noted a sudden urgency in their routines. The men hunted more, the families cured extra meat, cabin walls were reinforced roofs patched before the first snow. On October 1st, she wrote, Jay called the men together today. They spoke in low voices at the edge of the clearing for nearly 2 hours. When Richard returned, he told me nothing. Only that Father fears strangers may come before winter. The children are to remain close to the cabins. The hollow is now forbidden to all. Then came her final entry on October 12th, the one that mentioned the family council. After that, silence. The next word from Hollow Creek came on November 2nd when Jacob Turner, a trapper from Jasper, stumbled onto the deserted settlement. A storm had blown in and he sought shelter with the Eldridges. First thing I noticed, Turner later testified, was no smoke from the chimneys. Odd with cold setting in. I called out, no answer. The cabin stood open doors ajar. No family would allow that, not this time of year. Inside the main house, he found supper half prepared. A pot on the hearth had boiled dry. A doll sat upright in a chair as if waiting for its little owner. A Bible lay open beside a folded pair of spectacles. Across the other cabins, he saw scenes of ordinary life abruptly halted, a shirt left half-mended, with needles still stuck in the cloth. A checkerboard mid-game root cellars full and ready for winter. Everything in its place, except the people. The barns were still stocked with hay and feed, but no animals remained except a few half-wild chickens scratching in the dirt. The horses and mules were gone, yet most of the tack still hung neatly on the walls. What lingered most in Jacob Turner's memory was not what he saw, but what he didn't. The mountains are never silent. There is always wind in the trees, birds calling the rustle of small animals in the brush. But that night at Hollow Creek, Turner swore the silence was absolute, as if the land itself was holding its breath. He barred the door of the main cabin and spent a sleepless night inside alone with a pot of scorched stew, a child's doll propped on a chair, and a Bible left open beside a folded pair of spectacles. At first light, he made for Harrison through the snow to alert Sheriff Thomas Layton. The sheriff and his deputies arrived soon after and combed the settlement. What they found only deepened the mystery. There were no bodies, no graves, no blood. Valuable possessions had been left behind, including Rebecca's silver hairbrush and Jeremiah's pocket watch resting on the mantel. Food stores were untouched, cabins intact, and yet every living soul was gone. Layton's men searched the surrounding woods for miles and found nothing. The only trace of human movement came from Echo Hollow. There in the snow, a single set of footprints led down into the limestone basin and then back again toward the cabins. They were already filling with snowdrift, and the age of the prints could not be determined. Beyond that, the hollow revealed nothing. In his report, Sheriff Layton concluded reluctantly, "The absence of struggle suggests the settlers departed by choice." Yet their abandonment of tools, food, and shelter on the eve of winter contradicts every instinct of survival. No explanation can be given at this time. With no evidence of crime, the investigation was formally suspended. The press seized on the story. On November 10, 1895, the Harrison Daily Times ran the sensational headline, "Entire Settlement Vanishes Without a Trace." Reporters speculated wildly, some suggesting the Eldridges had fled Indian raids, though no such conflict existed in the Ozarks at that time. A follow-up article a week later quoted an elderly Cherokee man near Jasper who dismissed the rumors bluntly. "That hollow," he said, "has been known to our people for many generations. Nothing good lives there." The Cherokee elder's words lingered in the reports. "We call it the place where the earth listens. Our hunters avoided it. Those who camped nearby dreamed of voices urging them to dig into the ground. Your settlers were not the first to vanish there. They will not be the last. His warning suggested that Echo Hollow's reputation stretched back long before the Eldridges ever built their cabins. Archaeological surveys conducted in the 1950s confirmed that indigenous settlements once thrived across the Ozarks. Yet, curiously, no artifacts were ever found within several miles of the hollow, despite its fertile soil and natural shelter. It was as if people had always kept their distance. By the spring of 1896, the sheriff's investigation had collapsed under the weight of silence. No evidence surfaced. No bodies were ever recovered. The county eventually auctioned the abandoned property in 1897, dismantling the cabins for lumber. Hollow Creek began to fade from public memory, leaving only whispers of what had happened there. Still, hunters and trappers gave the valley a wide berth. They spoke of strange dreams when camping too close of an atmosphere that pressed down like a warning. In 1908, a surveyor's assistant disappeared for 2 days while working near the hollow. When he finally stumbled back into camp dazed and incoherent, he could not recall where he had been. The story might have remained a half-forgotten legend, if not for Walter Eldridge, a distant cousin of Jeremiah's. Walter was a professor of American history at Washington University in St. Louis. In 1923, he came across the family mystery and became obsessed. Where others had treated Hollow Creek as folklore, Walter approached it with academic rigor. He began combing through courthouse files, newspaper clippings, and family records. His greatest breakthrough came when he tracked down Emma Cartwright, the Springfield woman who had received Martha Eldridge's final letter. Elderly but sharp, Emma still remembered her friend vividly. She revealed several earlier letters Martha had sent, letters never seen by investigators. In one dated July 1895, Martha described Ezekiel's worsening condition. His night terrors left him hollow-eyed, and in waking hours he muttered about the watchers in the hollow. Jeremiah forbade all talk of it at meals, though Rebecca quietly confided her fears. Most disturbing, Martha added, was that young Benjamin Thornton had begun experiencing the same dreams, visions identical to Ezekiel's, though the two had never discussed them. Walter's attention fixed on Echo Hollow, that limestone depression that appeared again and again in the family's writings. In his journal later found among his effects, after his own disappearance, he wrote, "Local guides refused to lead me there. They claim dangerous terrain, but their eyes betray something deeper. One old man in Jasper told me the Cherokee called it the place where the ground listens." At the general store, when I inquired about hiring help, conversation stopped. I was firmly, though politely, discouraged. Despite the warnings, Walter pressed on. In April 1924, he located the hollow himself. His notes describe a perfectly circular basin, 50 yards across, 20 feet deep, its limestone walls smooth and angled so evenly they looked cut by design. And there was the sound. Even the faintest whisper traveled cleanly from one side to the other, as though the earth itself were repeating the words back. At the heart of Echo Hollow stood a single dead oak tree, its branches gnarled and twisted into shapes that seemed almost intentional. Walter noted how whispers carried flawlessly across the depression, yet once inside, the outside world grew strangely muted, as though sealed off by invisible glass. The silence pressed down like a weight. He made 3 documented visits to the hollow. On the second, he discovered a metal object embedded in the trunk of the oak, a corroded button from a Confederate uniform. Given Jeremiah Eldridge's service under Forrest, the find was unsettling, almost too coincidental. On his third visit, recorded in his final journal entry dated May 17, 1924, Walter came prepared to dig. "Return to the hollow today," he wrote. "Weather clear but unusually cold for May. brought tools to investigate soil near the oak-disturbed ground, circular 6 feet across, barren of growth. Vegetation pattern unnatural. Descending into the hollow outside sounds dull, as though through glass, yet sounds here carry sharp lingering. Midday excavation begun. Soil loose, previously dug and replaced. 8 inches down, flat stones laid deliberately. Beneath found small metal box, 6 by 4 inches, military issue. Lock rusted. Will attempt opening at camp. The sound is back today. Not wind, not echo. Something else. The entry ends there. 3 days later, Walter's rented room in Jasper was found abandoned. His belongings sat undisturbed. His journal left open on the nightstand at that final entry. His tools remained scattered at the rim of Echo Hollow, along with his camp gear. The box he described was never recovered, and Walter himself had vanished without a trace. Local authorities mounted only a token search before concluding he had likely suffered an accident in the rugged terrain, but the parallels to 1895 were impossible to ignore. Another Eldridge swallowed by the hollow. Another disappearance without explanation. Among Walter's papers, preserved in university archives, fragments of a theory emerge. He had become convinced that Jeremiah Eldridge had not chosen Hollow Creek for its land or its solitude, but for the hollow itself. Walter suspected Jeremiah's mysterious special duties during the Civil War had given him prior knowledge that tied directly to Echo Hollow and perhaps to whatever waited within it. Among Walter Eldridge's papers lay one of his most tantalizing finds, a reference buried in Confederate military archives. In 1863, a special detachment under Colonel Hargrove had been dispatched to investigate unusual geological formations in Tennessee, believed to hold strategic mineral value for the war effort. Among the names listed in the unit was a Corporal J. Eldridge. The official reports from that mission vanished in the chaos at the end of the war, either lost or destroyed. But Walter speculated that whatever Jeremiah saw during that expedition may have haunted him ever after. It may even explain why just a few years later, he sought out the strange limestone depression in Arkansas that came to be known as Echo Hollow. Notably, Jeremiah's land purchase coincided with an 1869 geological survey that briefly mentioned several circular sinkholes scattered across northern Arkansas. The mystery might have remained dormant if not for Dr. Margaret Winters, a folklorist at the University of Arkansas, who began collecting Ozark oral histories in the 1950s. In her fieldwork, she repeatedly encountered stories of the Hollow Creek disappearance, though by then, it had already shifted into legend. One of her most intriguing interviews came from Thomas McCreary, the aging son of the general store proprietor who had witnessed Jeremiah's final visit to Harrison. As a child in 1895, he hadn't understood the tension, but as an old man, he recalled the details his father had kept out of the official reports. According to Thomas, the well-dressed stranger who confronted Jeremiah that September wasn't a traveler at all. He had been asking about Jeremiah in town for several days, probing for information about Echo Hollow. When Eldridge left, the man lingered in the store showing papers that identified him as a representative of the Department of the Interior's Geological Survey Division. He asked pointed questions about strange sounds, artifacts, or openings in the limestone. Thomas's father told him later. That man said the Eldridges were sitting on something they didn't understand, and it wouldn't end well. Even more suspicious, the stranger reappeared a week after the disappearance was reported, joining Sheriff Layton's search party. Though Thomas voiced his concerns, the sheriff dismissed him, and the man's presence never appeared in the official record. Dr. Winters also recorded testimony from Esther Turner, daughter of Jacob Turner, the trapper who first discovered Hollow Creek abandoned. Esther claimed her father had withheld details from the sheriff According to her, Jacob admitted he found a circle of stones in the hollow arranged deliberately with soil inside that looked freshly disturbed. He told his family he stayed at the settlement for 2 nights, not 1. And on the 2nd night, he heard voices drifting from the hollow. Not normal voices, Esther recalled her father saying, but something that spoke inside his mind. He left at dawn and never returned, though. For years afterward, he would wake in the night claiming the voices still called him back. These accounts were enough to draw Dr. Winters to Echo Hollow in the summer of 1953. Like Walter before her, she wanted to see for herself what lay at the heart of the mystery. In the summer of 1953, Dr. Margaret Winters made her way into Echo Hollow with a graduate student, Raymond Carter, and a camera to document the site. What they found seemed to confirm and even expand the darkest suspicions about Hollow Creek. They quickly located the remains of the dead oak tree described in Walter Eldridge's 1924 journal. By then it had collapsed and decayed, but around its roots they unearthed a small corroded metal box. Inside were several water-damaged pages written in a cramped, slanted hand. Most of the text was illegible, but fragments could still be read. Again and again the same phrases appeared: those who watch from below, and the voices that are not voices. Winters carefully transcribed the words that could still be made out. Arrived at the hollow as instructed. Formation matches description from Tennessee expedition. Acoustic properties identical. Colonel H believes these structures are not natural, but constructed. Voices clearer at night. They speak of things buried deep knowledge from before. Excavation reached 30 feet today. Limestone gives way to something else, not of any known geology. It swallows sound presses against the ears. Men refused to continue after dreams began. Colonel H arrested them for desertion, though we are no longer truly military. War Department disbanded unit, but he insists the work is vital. Opening discovered today descends at sharp angle. Air, cold, metallic, organic. Colonel H plans descent tomorrow. Only 5 of us remain. Colonel H gone. Expedition terminated. Sealed the entrance. Dreams continue even at distance. Voices know my name now. They speak of other sites. One in the Ozarks must remain sealed. Some things must stay buried. The handwriting later compared against county records matched Jeremiah Eldridge's. If authentic, these fragments were nothing less than his private war journal evidence that during his unexplained absence from 1863 to 1864, he had been part of Colonel Hargrove's secret detachment. The notes suggest they had uncovered a formation like Echo Hollow in Tennessee and had gone far deeper than the official record ever admitted. More disturbing still, Winters and Carter discovered signs of an old excavation at the eastern rim of Echo Hollow. The ground had long since overgrown, but the pattern of digging was clear. Whatever work had been carried out there had been abandoned decades earlier, just as Jeremiah's fragment claimed. Raymond Carter later recalled that when he questioned Dr. Winters' interpretation, she abandoned her usual scholarly calm. "They're still there, Raymond," she told him. "Whatever happened to the Eldridges, to Walter, it's still there, waiting in the dark. And it knows we've been looking." Dr. Winters never published her Ozark folklore collection. Instead, she sealed her Hollow Creek recordings in the university archives, stipulating they remain closed until 50 years after her death. When the collection was finally opened in 2018, the reel containing the crucial interviews with Thomas McCreary and Esther Turner was missing. The last major development in the mystery came in 1964, when James Thornton, a graduate student writing a thesis on frontier communities, unearthed overlooked county records. Among them was an 1872 land survey conducted just 3 years after Jeremiah Eldridge established Hollow Creek. The survey confirmed the presence of a circular limestone depression on the property and noted that indigenous guides refused to enter it. More troubling, the surveyor mentioned signs of prior excavation. Its purpose unknown, suggesting Echo Hollow had drawn interest long before the Eldridges arrived. Thornton also discovered a partial inventory of items recovered from the abandoned cabins. Listed among them was a leather-bound journal with its pages removed, its cover marked with unfamiliar symbols hidden beneath the main cabin's floorboards. The journal was never preserved and never appeared in Sheriff Laysight's official reports. Whether it was misplaced, stolen, or deliberately omitted remains unknown. Perhaps the most disturbing record Thornton found was the death certificate of Harold McCreary, the storekeeper who had witnessed Jeremiah's encounter with the mysterious stranger. McCreary died on December 12, 1895, just days after testifying to Sheriff Layston. His cause of death was listed as apoplexy, but the attending physician noted symptoms that did not fit: sudden hallucinations, auditory disturbances, and extreme agitation in the hours before his death. Driven by these discoveries, Thornton traveled to Newton County that spring. His letters to his thesis advisor suggest he located Echo Hollow and spent several days exploring it. His final letter, dated June 12, 1964, contained words that have since become infamous among researchers of the case. "I've found something that may explain everything. A narrow crevice hidden by vines in the eastern wall. It extends deep into the limestone. Tomorrow I will descend with climbing equipment. If my theory is correct, the Eldridges didn't leave Hollow Creek. They went deeper into it." Thornton was never heard from again. Thornton was declared missing 3 days after failing to return to his rented room in Jasper. Searchers found his camp notebooks and equipment near Echo Hollow, but no sign of him. The narrow crevice he described was located, but investigators determined it was too tight for an adult to pass beyond a certain point. After a week of fruitless searching, the effort was abandoned. Thornton was never found. His unfinished thesis offered one of the most provocative interpretations of the Hollow Creek mystery. He argued that Jeremiah Eldridge had not stumbled upon the valley by chance, but had deliberately chosen the site because of Echo Hollow. Jeremiah, Thornton suggested, possessed prior knowledge tied to his unexplained Civil War service, and perhaps to Colonel Hargrove's secret detachment. Thornton believed the voices described by Rebecca and Martha may not have been delusions at all, but the sounds of others already within the hollow beings, or remnants unknown to the families who settled above them. He speculated that the excavation noted in the 1872 survey could have been Jeremiah's own clandestine work. Most unsettling, Thornton began to link the Hollow Creek case to a broader pattern. He identified other sites across the Appalachian and Ozark ranges where limestone depressions with abnormal acoustics were recorded and where disappearances followed. In 1834, a surveying party in eastern Tennessee documented a circular depression where whispered voices echoed unnaturally. 3 men vanished during the expedition. The official report dismissed them as deserters. In 1851, a small Kentucky mining camp collapsed into panic after workers heard voices in the stone. 3 miners disappeared overnight, their wages uncollected, their tools left behind. And most damning of all, Thornton tied the Hollow Creek legend to the very Civil War mission mentioned in Jeremiah's fragmented journal. Records confirm that in 1863, Colonel Hargrove led a detachment, including Corporal Jeremiah Eldridge, into the Tennessee hills to investigate a site of strategic interest. Only 5 of the 12 men returned. The Army claimed they had been ambushed by Union forces, but survivors' private letters tell a different story. They wrote of a hollow in the limestone of voices no man could ignore, and of comrades who lost their minds before vanishing underground. What became of James Thornton? Like Walter Eldridge before him, and like the Lost Hollow clan, Before that, he simply vanished. His papers were archived at the university until 1968, transferred to microfilm, and then during a reorganization the following year disappeared entirely. They have never resurfaced. And so the mystery of Hollow Creek remains unsolved. 17 men, women, and children gone without a trace in 1895. Every investigation since, whether by family academics or local law enforcement, has ended in silence, confusion, or another disappearance. What remains are fragments: Rebecca's journal, Martha's letters, Walter's notes, Thornton's drafts. Each points to something beyond ordinary explanation, not supernatural perhaps, but far outside common experience. Echo Hollow itself is no legend. It still lies in the Ozarks, a perfect circle in the limestone, its walls steep, its acoustics uncanny. The forest has reclaimed the valley where the cabins once stood. No sanctioned excavation has ever been carried out. From the air, satellite imagery shows the depression exactly as it was described over a century ago. But the land is private, fenced off, and guarded by silence. Perhaps the most unsettling part of this story is not what has been discovered, but what has been erased: Dr. Winter's missing reels, Thornton's vanished microfilm, the strange journal with unknown markings that slipped from the evidence files. Too many pieces gone too neatly, too deliberately. It suggests not only a mystery, but a concerted effort to bury that mystery deeper than any hollow. Locals still avoid the place. They speak of it only in whispers, if at all. In 1957, one elderly man in Jasper told a reporter, "Some places don't want to be known. That hollow keeps its secrets. And those who try to dig them up the ground might just decide to keep them too." What truly happened on that October night in 1895? Did the Eldridges flee from an unseen threat? Were they victims of violence hidden with extraordinary care? Or, as Thornton dared to suggest, did they go deeper, drawn into something that had waited beneath Echo Hollow long before their arrival? The Ozark limestone is riddled with caves and tunnels, many still unmapped, some stretching for miles into blackness. Could Echo Hollow connect to that hidden world? And if so, what might have called the settlers down into the dark? We may never know. The records are incomplete, the witnesses long dead, the evidence lost to time. All that remains is an empty valley, a hollow that listens, and a silence that refuses to give back the truth. Every investigation into Hollow Creek has ended without resolution, and more than once, the investigator has become part of the mystery themselves. One final note is worth mentioning. In 1977, a hiker near the site of Echo Hollow reported finding a child's shoe. Weathered but intact, it was traced to a late 19th century manufacturer and believed to have belonged to a girl of about 7 years old, the same age as Martha Eldridge's daughter, Elizabeth, when she vanished in 1895. The shoe was entered into evidence, but when researchers requested to examine it in 1983, they were told it had been mistakenly disposed of during a routine cleanup. In 1992, geologist Dr. Eleanor Blackwood examined Echo Hollow as part of a broader karst survey. Her report described anomalies that defied easy explanation. The hollow's circularity was too precise for a natural sinkhole, and ground-penetrating radar revealed density patterns beneath the surface inconsistent with typical limestone. Most striking were the acoustic tests, which confirmed earlier accounts. Certain low frequencies were amplified until they brushed against the threshold of human hearing. Under the right conditions, Blackwood noted such resonance could easily produce auditory illusions, whispers mistaken for voices. Her report was filed with the U.S. Geological Survey. 2 years later, it was classified, and access was restricted without explanation. In 1998, local historian Robert Jenkins attempted to compile the Hollow Creek story for a book on Ozark mysteries. But after visiting Newton County that fall, he abruptly abandoned the project. According to his widow, he returned pale and shaken, destroyed his notes, and would only say, "Some things should stay buried." When Jenkins died of a stroke in 2002, his effects included a Confederate uniform button and a fragment of limestone carved with markings his widow swore were not natural. Both items disappeared from his study before they could be examined, and so the silence around Hollow Creek remains. The Ozarks keep their secrets well. Echo Hollow endures as a perfect circle in the forested hills, where sound bends unnaturally and the ground seems, in the words of the Cherokee, to listen. For those who wander too close to the forgotten path that once led to Hollow Creek, the advice of locals has not changed in over a century. Listen to the silence. And if the silence speaks back, do not answer. Do not investigate. And above all, do not dig. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, and some who vanish do not wish to be found.